Now Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 are two very good Far Cry games, and now players on the internet and in discussions very oftentimes can't decide which game is better. There's one side that praises Far Cry 3 and the other side prefers Far Cry 4. But now after playing and reviewing the two games in the recent weeks, I decided to let them go head to head and compare them to one another. And now deciding which game is better ultimately comes down to personal preferences, as both have their strengths and weaknesses, so this is only my opinion and how I view the whole topic. So now the first point that I want to compare the two games with are the settings and the open worlds where the games play. And now Far Cry 3 obviously is set on a tropical island in the Pacific where players are stranded after a vacation has gone wrong. And now the world is very vibrant. Now obviously you'll immediately notice that the game was created 3 years before Far Cry 4. So that means that the graphics obviously are better in Far Cry 4. But Far Cry 3's open world still makes a great job. You know, it firstly introduced the very beloved outposts in Far Cry 3, and the tropical setting obviously is something very different from Far Cry 4, because the fourth Far Cry game takes place in the fictional Himalayan country of Kyrat, which offers a very diverse landscape of mountains, forests and villages. And now which open world do I like better? And now in my review of Far Cry 4 I already said that this setting was definitely my favorite one. You know, just the amazing views you have in Far Cry 4 of the crazy mountains. You know, the open world is much more diverse than in Far Cry 3, I believe. So when it comes to the open world and the setting, I'm definitely gonna give the point to Far Cry 4. Now let's talk about the protagonists of the two games. On one hand you have Jason Brody, a young man who finds himself caught in a conflict between pirates and native islanders, and on the other hand you have Ajay Ghale, who is also a young man returning to his homeland of Kyrat to fulfill his mother's final wish, that ends up getting entangled in a civil war. And here I immediately have to say that I have to go with Jason Brody from Far Cry 3. I mean, the character development was way deeper and more fleshed out with Jason than it was with Ajay. And obviously the difference here was that Jason Brody actually had some connections to real life people, where in Far Cry 4 it felt like the protagonist only had a real connection to his mother, which was dead. And Jason Brody just feels much more real and much more relatable. And it's also very interesting to see how he develops from the first hours of the game to the late hours from the game, and you notice that he's a very different character. So when it comes to the protagonists, I have to give this point to Far Cry 3. And now probably the most difficult point that I have on this list today and in this comparison are the antagonists. You know, Far Cry 3 is very known for its memorable antagonist, Vas Montenegro, who is a very charismatic and insane pirate leader. But also on the other hand, you have Pagan Min in Far Cry 4, who also is a very charismatic and enigmatic dictator with a very complex personality. And while I believe that those two antagonists are very much different from one another, still in some way they still have a lot of similarities. Now in the beginning of the two games you just think that those two are just two crazy people who want nothing but death and blood. But as the games continue and when you come towards the end, you realize that aren't actually what you think they were in the beginning of the game. And if the Far Cry series does one thing great, we have to say that they very often nail the antagonists. I mean, just think about it, Vas and Pagan Min are actually on the covers of the two games. I mean, imagine a Witcher 3 with an Eridan on the cover, or imagine an Assassin's Creed game with the actual villain. So this one was definitely very hard to pick, but if I had to choose one antagonist, I would have to go with Pagan Min, just because he carried the story of Far Cry 4 so much. So now while we're at it, let's just talk about the story and the themes of the two games. Now for those who have played Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, I think we can all agree that both of these stories are not incredible, but I have to say that Far Cry 4's story, and especially the two endings, really disappointed me. I mean, it seemed when you were talking to Amita or Sabal like the Golden Path was literally everything Kyrat needed to be an open and free country. But as it turned out, none of these two decisions that you had to make during the story were actually not better than Pagan Min at all. I mean, what we've seen in the last couple of clips of the game, I would actually go as far as to say that Pagan Min was better than the Golden Path, but I made a video about that topic that I posted a couple of weeks ago. And Far Cry 3's story definitely isn't a 10 out of 10, but you know, the self-discovery aspect and Jason confronting the harsh realities of the island really has enough to be better than Far Cry 4's. Now let's talk about the gameplay of the two Far Cry games. You know, both games share similar gameplay mechanics that include open world exploration, that put a bigger emphasis on hunting, crafting, and obviously on combat. But obviously Far Cry 4 is the newer game, so it also introduces some new gameplay elements, such as the ability to ride elephants and an expanded variety of weapons. Probably the biggest new thing that it introduced was the grapple. Because Kyrat obviously has a lot of mountains, so something like that would be very necessary. But in Far Cry 3, you know, when you think about the island, you know, a grapple wouldn't make as much sense as in Far Cry 4. But you know, when we talk about gameplay, I think both of these games are quite similar to one another. And you can't really say that one is particularly better than the other. And now the last point that I want to discuss today is the atmosphere of the two games. And you know, while Far Cry 4 offers a more diverse and politically charged atmosphere due to obviously the country's civil unrest, Far Cry 3 on the other hand has a more focused narrative with a psychological journey that centers around Jason's transformation. And you know, I have to say that in general I like the atmosphere of Far Cry 3 more, and also the connections that you have with the people really make a great impact, like whether it's Dennis or whether it's your friends from America. You know, in Far Cry 4, you know, there are really no emotional connections between Ajay Ghale and the characters in the game. So that's why this point will definitely go to Far Cry 3. Alright, so in conclusion I have to say that both of these games are very good Far Cry games and are definitely in the top 3 games from the Far Cry series, for me at least. But when I have to pick one game over the other, I think Far Cry 3 edges it out a little bit. You know, while I really love Pagan Min as an antagonist and the setting and open world of Far Cry 4, it really lagged when it came to the story, the ending, and the protagonist of the game. And you know, the personal and psychological journey of Jason Brody really got me more emotionally invested into the game. So of course, as I said, this is a very personal opinion, but for me, I have to go with Far Cry 3 when it comes to which game is better. Alright guys, now I'm interested in your opinions and which game you like more, and I will be making more of comparisons like these in the future, so if you're interested, feel free to subscribe. That was it for me in today's video. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye bye.